Tonight, in custody, Fort St. John Mounties arrest a suspect in a pair of shootings. Disturbing details, 2 Grand Prairie men charged in a sexual assault, and claims of racism. BC independent MLAs in more hot water. Good evening and thank you for joining us. And we begin tonight with an arrest in a pair of weekend shootings and a home invasion in Fort St. John. Mounties saying tonight one man is in custody after a number of shots fired reports. At around 12:30 Sunday morning, police identified a suspect after an alleged home invasion with a firearm. Now, police say it happened in the area of 96th Street in Fort St. John. Then about an hour later, shots were fired into a vehicle allegedly in the 11,000 block of 92nd Street. No one was injured, and Mounties say the shooting appeared to be targeted. Then later that same day, reports of shots fired on 269 Road. Once again, no one was injured. A search warrant issued for the home on 269 Road found evidence police say appeared to link to the first shooting. Kelly Schuler is facing a number of charges, including break and enter and the careless use of a firearm. Schuler remains in police custody pending his next scheduled court appearance. And the Fort St. John RCMP are thanking the public for their help in finding a woman wanted for theft. Mounties were looking for Verna Charlene Langevin. The 56-year-old was wanted for theft under $5,000. Now, police not providing much information about how or where she was located. They did say she's been arrested and taken into police custody. 2 men from Grand Prairie are facing sexual assault charges involving a youth. The assaults are alleged to have occurred between August and December of last year. The age and gender of the victim has not been made public. Julian Gonzalez is facing a number of charges, including 2 counts of sexual assault and possession for the purpose of publishing child pornography. Kyle Pellet is charged with sexual assault as a party to the offense. Now, both men were released from custody pending their next court appearance. Allegations of racism tonight against independent MLAs questioning First Nations sovereignty here in British Columbia. The war of words is increasingly public. The politicians aren't backing down, insisting they're not racist. They say they're simply raising concerns about equality. Penny Daflos has the details.
May 1st, Dallas Brody courted controversy once again.
The greatest threats to our unity. Political interference by the Chinese Communist Party. The fragmentation of BC by over 200 bands, each asserting its own sovereignty.
The Premier responded immediately.
This member's incoherent and consistently racist posturing in this House against Indigenous and First Nations that do in fact have rights and sovereignty in this province.
The Penticton Indian Band wrote a letter to Brody and her fellow independents denouncing the divisive rhetoric and what it called explicit racism.
Absolutely not either of those things. I would say that we want to be undivisive and get away from policies that are rooted in racial differences.
I think we fight every day to make sure that everybody in this province has equal opportunity. And the last thing we want to do is divide people based on race or anything like that.
Brody and Tara Armstrong have now responded with a public letter accusing First Nations leaders of deepening racial conflict.
It doesn't feature any facts or new perspectives or information. It just continues the racialized, discriminatory attack on Indigenous peoples.
The Union of BC Indian Chiefs points out every MLA voted in favor of adopting the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2019, with the public increasingly understanding and supportive of residential school survivors. They view the independents' comments as a step backwards.
It's so counterproductive, it's so destructive, it's so divisive.
Brody and Armstrong don't see it that way.
What it really boils down to is just making sure, again, that everybody has equal rights in the province.
The key is to bring people together, all of us working together as a team, not saying this group, this group, this group, everybody sort of fighting against one another.
Brody started the war of words in the legislature, and while she's drawing attention, it does nothing to change Indigenous rights. Penny Daflos, CTV News, Vancouver.
An investigation looking into the planned ignitions by the BC Wildfire Service that destroyed homes during a 2023 wildfire was reasonable. That, according to the Forest Practices Board. It follows a wildfire 2 years ago that grew to over 2,000 hectares in size. An investigation into the wildfire near Gun Lake revealing a troubled history of complaints against the Wildfire Service. Residents complain that a planned ignition destroyed 40 homes near the lake. The complaints raising serious concerns about oversight, responsiveness, and wildfire prevention practices. The Forest Practices Board says the Wildfire Service complied with the Wildfire Act, and the board adds the decision to use planned ignition was based on sound forest practices. To Ottawa, where Mark Carney, his cabinet, was sworn in at Rideau Hall today. It's a mix of some new faces and some Trudeau-era ministers who are now tasked with governing Canada. Here now is CTV's Judy Tritt.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's cabinet, 28 hand-picked lieutenants chosen to fight a trade war as Canada faces threats from an American president.
Canadians elected this new government with a strong mandate to define a new economic and security relationship with the United States and to build a stronger economy.
But it's not just Donald Trump who looms over Carney's choices. The Prime Minister needed to distance himself from his predecessor. Of the prominent ministers who served under Justin Trudeau, only a dozen remain in Carney's inner circle.
This cabinet is smaller and more focused than those of previous governments. It will operate with a commitment to true cabinet government, with everyone expected and empowered to show leadership.
François-Philippe Champagne remains in finance, while Chrystia Freeland stays in transport and internal trade. Of experienced ministers, several are changing places.
I, Indira Anita Anand.
Anita Anand becomes Minister of Foreign Affairs, while Melanie Joly shifts to the industry post. Meanwhile, David McGuinty gets promoted to defense.
I, Tim Hodson, do solemnly and sincerely declare.
There are 15 rookie ministers, among them Tim Hodgson, the former chair of Hydro One, who becomes Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, and former Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson, who becomes the Housing Minister. Carney's first ever cabinet also has an equal number of men and women, including Mandy Gulmasti, who is the first Indigenous person to lead Indigenous services. As calls for Alberta to separate grows louder, Carney has bolstered Western representation. A former reservist and lawyer, Eleanor Ozowski, is the new Minister of Emergency Management. Manitoba Métis MP Rebecca Chartrand becomes the Minister of Northern Affairs. Buckley Belanger, who has served as mayor and in Saskatchewan's provincial government, becomes a Secretary of State.
Our new government will be a strong and reliable partner to the provinces, the territories, and to Indigenous peoples.
But it's not enough of a change for the Conservatives.
He appointed Trudeau's old team and Trudeau's old advisors.
In addition to the 28 cabinet ministers, Mark Carney also appointed 10 secretaries of state to support their work. One of their first priorities will be eliminating federal trade barriers to provincial trade by Canada Day. The work officially begins on May 26, when Parliament resumes. Judy Trin, CTV News, Ottawa.
And it didn't take long for criticism of the cabinet's elections to come from Alberta. After Toronto MP Julie Babruzin was sworn in as Environment Minister, the Chief of Staff to Danielle Smith posted, "Sit down for this, Alberta." The post goes on to say, Babruzin supports carbon pricing and is against oil sands expansion. He added, fire meets gas. Smith has said she wants to reset Alberta's combative relationship with Ottawa. Recounts carried out in 2 eastern Canadian ridings today with very slim margins separating candidates on election night. The difference between the 2 leading candidates in the Milton East Halton Hills riding in Ontario was just 29 votes following election night. A judicial recount is also underway in the electoral district of Terra Nova, the Peninsulas in Newfoundland. There's just 2 votes that separate the leading candidates there. And another blow to Ontario's auto industry, Honda announcing today it's pausing its planned $15 billion electric vehicle investment. It's a project that was expected to create roughly 1,000 jobs and produce nearly 250,000 electric vehicles every year. CTV's Adrian Goberel is following this story, and it's more from Toronto.
Hey, there we go, now that's green.
Political handiwork and plenty of glad handing were on full display in Alliston, Ontario, when the deal was first announced in April 2024.
This is generational.
In an email to CTV News, Honda says the recent slowdown of the EV market has led to an approximate 2-year postponement of the comprehensive value chain investment project in Canada. Ontario's premier, who championed the deal, is now in the hot seat.
When those companies break their promise to workers and to communities, he just throws up his hands in the air.
When I've talked to Honda, they've promised us they're going to continue on with their expansion. They're going to keep that facility moving forward.
The Japanese auto giant had pledged a $15 billion investment. Ottawa came to the table with $2.5 billion in tax credits, while Ontario committed $2.5 billion in incentives to build a new electric vehicle manufacturing plant and open multiple EV battery facilities. Ottawa and Ontario have bet big on EVs.
2 years ago, when the bets were made, were way off base. We may end up with battery plants that aren't particularly busy in the early phases.
Industry watchers say while slumping electric vehicle sales may be in part to blame, the Trump effect simply can't be ignored.
Every day, up and down, the tariff roller coaster goes. And that uncertainty means if you're a business leader, you can't make any real decisions around investment until you have some stability, consistency, security going forward.
When the $15 billion agreement was announced back in the spring of 2024, it was touted as the largest auto investment in Canadian history. The deal has now been parked. Adrian Gobrel, CTV News, Toronto.
An Ontario court has extended Hudsons Bay creditor protection until the end of July. A lawyer for Canada's oldest retailer has argued the extension was necessary due to the ongoing process of finding buyers for the business and its assets. Well, today, the judge extended the protection to July the 31st. The judge also granting a request to allow the company to pay as much as $165 million to the Bay's senior lenders. Hudsons Bay filed for creditor protection back in March, citing difficulties paying its mounting bills as it liquidates all of its stores. Dozens of BC firefighters have left the province to offer a helping hand. They're being called to northern Manitoba to help fight a 20,000-hectare fire that's burning out of control.
The sky was just orange, very orange, and you could see the flames further off, but not as close as they are now.
A total of 41 firefighters and agency reps are helping out. It's not clear how long the crews will be in Manitoba, but they can be deployed for up to 2 weeks at a time. The massive fire forcing the evacuation of hundreds of people Thursday from the Rocky Lakes area, Wanless and Carrot Valley area, about 500 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg. Some residents have since been allowed to return home. RCMP in Nova Scotia say they've received more than 180 tips in connection with the search for 2 missing children who disappeared back on May the 2nd. That morning, Lily and Jack Sullivan were reported missing, and that prompted a massive search through a heavily wooded area, which was scaled back 5 days later. Then on May 8th and the 9th, the underwater recovery team searched bodies of water in the area, but no evidence of the siblings was found. To date, 35 people have been identified for formal interviews as part of the police investigation, including community members and those closest to the children. U.S. President Donald Trump says the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia is more powerful than ever after the country signed a $142 billion arms deal today.
Today we reaffirm this important bond, and we take the next steps to make our relationship closer, stronger, and more powerful than ever before.
The United States will provide state-of-the-art warfighting equipment to Saudi Arabia in exchange for $20 billion worth of investment in artificial intelligence in the U.S. Trump called the U.S.-Saudi relationship a bedrock of security and prosperity. Well, Trump is on the first leg of a 4-day diplomatic tour of the Middle East with stops in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Well, Cassie Ventura, the ex-girlfriend of Sean Diddy Combs, testified in day 2 of the sex trafficking trial against the music mogul, and a warning: some of the details in this story are disturbing. Ventura testified today that Combs' drug-fueled sex parties he called freak-offs happened so often that it eventually felt like a job. She says she participated because she was in love with Combs and wanted to make him happy, adding it felt like she didn't have much of a choice. Ventura also said arguments with Combs would turn violent, and he controlled everything from her career to the way she dressed. Combs has pled not guilty to all of the charges, with his defense arguing All of the sexual encounters were consensual. French film star Gerard Depardieu has been found guilty of sexual assault. Depardieu has been handed an 18-month suspended prison sentence for sexually assaulting 2 women on a 2021 film set. His argument to the court was Depardieu said some women were, quote, too easily shocked. Depardieu's attorney says they will appeal the decision. The lawyer for one of the victims says she hopes the ruling will end impunity for artists in the film industry. All right, please do stay tuned. I'll be right back after the break with weather.